I still remember the bite of that winter wind, howling through the pines like a warning from the wild itself, carrying flakes that stung my cheeks as I crested the hill and locked eyes with her. Those piercing blue eyes of a husky, wild and unyielding, fixed on a secret buried in the snow that would shatter my solitude and rewrite the quiet chapters of my life forever. You know how life has a way of sneaking up on you when you're least expecting it, slipping in through the cracks like frost on a window pane? I was just trying to get through another gray day in that forgotten corner of the world, up in the northern reaches of Maine, where the winters stretch long and the summers barely whisper hello. My name's Elias, and at 42, I'd carved out a quiet existence on the edge of town. Nothing fancy, just a small cabin I'd fixed up myself with calloused hands and stubborn determination after my wife, Lena, passed 5 years back. Cancer had come quick and cruel, stealing her away in a blur of hospital lights and hollow reassurances, leaving me with a hole in my chest that no amount of chopping wood, long solitary walks through the evergreens, or the steady rhythm of repairing old snowmobiles could fill. Folks in town pitied me, the widower who kept mostly to himself, showing up at the diner for coffee and eggs but rarely lingering for conversation. They meant well with their nods and quiet "how you holdens," but pity's a poor substitute for the kind of company that warms you from the inside out. I worked odd jobs to keep the bills paid, fixing engines for the local outfitters, hauling supplies through the drifts in my battered truck, but mostly I wandered those woods alone, letting the relentless cold numb the deeper ache that words couldn't touch. It started on a Tuesday, I think, one of those crisp mornings where the sky hung low and heavy, threatening more snow. I'd taken my usual route down the old logging road, the one that twists like a forgotten vein past the rusted hulks of the abandoned mill and fizzles out near Blackwood Cabin, a relic from the logging boom days, now sagging under a tangle of ivy and the weight of decades. That place had been empty for as long as anyone could remember, its roof half caved in from a fierce nor'easter some 20 years back, windows shattered like broken promises, and the whole structure leaning as if exhausted by standing. Locals steered clear of it. They spun tales over beers at the tavern about how it was cursed or haunted by some logger's ghost, or at the very least just plain bad luck that clung to anyone who lingered too long. Me? I didn't put much stock in ghosts or curses. Life had thrown enough real shadows my way without needing supernatural ones, but I respected the quiet desolation of the place, how it mirrored the empty spaces in my own days. That's when I saw her for the first time, clear as day against the white expanse. A husky, purebred by the look of her elegant lines and that unmistakable mask across her face, thick silver-gray coat matted with ice and snow, those signature blue eyes like chips of glacial ice staring me down from the shadows of the sagging porch. She was lean to the point of heartbreaking, her ribs faintly visible beneath the insulating fur that huskies are famous for enduring the harshest Arctic blasts. But there was a fierce, unbowed quality in her stance, ears perked forward in alert challenge, hackles raised along her back like a ridge of fresh powder. She didn't bark or lunge forward in aggression. She just watched me with an intensity that rooted me to the spot, a low growl rumbling deep in her throat like the distant roll of thunder over a frozen lake. I froze there on the path, my heart picking up pace in the sudden silence broken only by the wind's low moan through the branches. Strays weren't entirely uncommon up here in these parts. Folks sometimes dumped their dogs when the cost of feed got too high or the winters proved too unforgiving for city-bred pets. But this one felt profoundly different from the usual ragged wanderers. She was no mangy mutt, scraping by on scraps. Her build screamed husky grace and purpose, those powerful legs and broad chest built for the endurance of pulling sleds across endless tundras, her curled tail a signature curl that no other breed quite matches. I backed off slowly, palms raised in a universal gesture of peace, and hightailed it back toward home, my boots crunching through the crusty snow. But those eyes stuck with me through the rest of the day, haunting the edges of my thoughts as I tinkered with a carburetor in my shed, and even into my dreams that night, where they glowed like beacons in the dark. What was a dog like that doing out there all alone in the wilds, so far from any trail or road that saw regular traffic? By the time morning light filtered through my cabin's frost-laced windows, I couldn't shake the image of her. I grabbed a can of tuna from the back of the pantry, Lena's old trick for coaxing the neighborhood cats closer during lazy summer evenings, and headed back out, the cold air sharpening my resolve. She was still there when I arrived, hunkered down by the cabin's weathered side wall, her paws methodically pawing at a deep drift of snow that had piled against the crumbling foundation, as if unearthing some buried treasure. When she spotted me approaching through the trees, those striking blue eyes narrowed to slits, and she bared her sharp white teeth in a clear warning, the snarl that followed sending unrelated chills racing down my spine despite the layers I wore. I set the can down midway between us, about 20 feet out on a flat rock to keep it from the snow, and retreated behind the thick trunk of a nearby pine, giving her space. She circled the offering warily at first, nose twitching as she sniffed the air, her husky instincts on full display, cautious and calculating, ever the survivor honed by generations of Siberian wolves to trust no one lightly. Eventually, she snatched it up, eating with quick, efficient bites that spoke of real hunger, but she never once took her intense gaze off me, as if daring me to make a wrong move. That uneasy exchange became our daily routine over the following days, a fragile thread in the vast white quiet. Every morning, and sometimes at dusk, I'd trek out along that same road with whatever scraps I could spare, leftover venison stew from my pot, bits of beef jerky I'd cured myself last fall, even a frozen hunk of kibble thawed by the fire, and leave them at our designated spot. She'd respond with the same ritual, a guttural growl to stake her claim, a slow approach with body low and ears pinned, devouring the meal in gulps, and then a swift retreat to her guarded position. No steps closer on her part, no real trust bridging the gap, just those piercing blue eyes, holding a mix of accusation for my intrusion and a silent plea that tugged at something deep inside me. Weeks blurred into a steady, almost meditative rhythm amid the deepening snows that turned the entire landscape into an endless, muffled blur of white, where sounds dulled and time seemed to stretch. I found myself talking to her during those careful deposits, my voice low and steady like I was confiding in an old friend who wouldn't interrupt or judge, words spilling out into the frosted air about the minutiae of my days or the weight I carried. "Rough night out here again, huh, girl? That wind's got a mean bite. Bet you'd make a fine lead dog on a sled team in better times, cutting through blizzards like they were nothing." She'd tilt her head slightly at the sound of my voice, that classic husky curiosity flickering across her expressive face for a brief moment before the familiar growl returned to reassert her boundaries. In my mind, I started calling her Shadow, a name that fit how she seemed to melt into the lengthening dusk shadows around the cabin silhouette, her gray coat blending seamlessly with the twilight hues. But something about her behavior gnawed at me persistently, a puzzle I couldn't ignore. Why did she cling to that exact spot with such ferocity? I'd watch from afar as she'd dig at the snow under the cabin's overhang, her movements frantic at times, claws scraping against the frozen ground with a determination that bordered on desperation, only to pause and whine softly when she thought I wasn't close enough to hear. I wondered if she was trapped by injury, or perhaps caught in some snare left by careless hunters, but getting near enough to check felt like tempting fate. Her defenses were a wall as solid as the ice around us. One evening, as the weak sun dipped low on the horizon and painted the endless snow in soft pinks and golds, I lingered longer than usual, hidden in the underbrush. That's when I heard it for the first time, a faint high-pitched yelp echoing from beneath the cabin's floorboards, muffled but unmistakable. My blood ran cold in an instant, a chill that went bone deep. It wasn't just her out there enduring the wild. There was something, or someone, else involved. I sat there motionless in the gathering dark, the cold seeping through my coat as I pieced it all together like fragments of a half-remembered dream. Shadow wasn't merely surviving the winter's grip. She was protecting something vital with every fiber of her being, standing guard in a way that stirred echoes of lives I'd known. That realization hit me like a sudden gust, stirring up memories of Lena in her final months. How she'd been so fiercely protective of her own vulnerability, guarding her pain and fears from the world, and even from me at times, until she couldn't hold it in anymore. I couldn't just walk away from it now, not with that sound lingering in my ears like a call for help. The very next morning, under a sky still bruised from the night, I bundled up more thoroughly than usual, stuffing extra wool blankets into my pack, grabbing a heavy-duty flashlight with fresh batteries, some clean old towels from Lena's linen closet that still carried a faint scent of lavender, and set out with a deliberate slowness, my steps measured to avoid startling her. She was right where I'd left her, her sleek, husky form silhouetted sharply against the blinding white expanse, those blue eyes locking onto me like twin lasers from the moment I emerged from the tree line. I spoke to her in the softest tone I could muster, the same soothing cadence Lena had used to calm me after my worst nightmares, words flowing easy and unhurried. "Easy now, Shadow. I'm not here to hurt you or chase you off. Just want to see what's got you so riled up out here all alone." Her growl rumbled low in response, but it carried a note of hesitation this time, less a threat and more a question. I inched forward across the snow, leaving the morning's offering of warmed milk-soaked bread even closer than before, just a few feet from her position. She didn't lunge or snap immediately. Instead, she paced a tight circle, her body tense, glancing repeatedly back at that persistent snow pile with a mother's anxious flick of her ears. That's when the whining started up again, clearer now in the still morning air. Multiple tiny voices overlapping in desperate harmony, high and keening like the wind through cracks. Puppies. The word hit me with a force that twisted my gut. My heart clenched tight in my chest, a mix of awe and sorrow flooding in. Huskies are pack animals through and through, loyal to their kin with a devotion bred into their very bones from centuries of traversing frozen expanses in tight family units. And here she was, this lone mother fighting against the brutal cold and isolation to shield her young. I dropped to my knees right there in the snow, ignoring the wet seep through my pants, and began brushing away the layers with my gloved hands, careful and deliberate, revealing the ground inch by inch. She lunged forward in a blur, her teeth grazing the thick fabric of my sleeve with a warning snap that could have drawn blood if she'd meant it, but I held perfectly still, breath steady, eyes meeting hers without challenge. "It's okay, girl. We're in this together now. No one's taking anything from you." Something imperceptible shifted in those vivid blue eyes. Not full surrender, but a fracture in the iron wall of her distrust, a glimmer of calculation weighing my intent. Emboldened, I worked faster once she eased back a step, the drift giving way to expose a shallow hollow scraped out under the cabin's splintered floorboards. A makeshift den cobbled together from shredded bark, pine needles, and tufts of her own shed undercoat for warmth. There they were, nestled in a trembling pile, 5 tiny huskies, barely a few weeks old by their size, their eyes still sealed shut against the world, their fluffy coats a delicate mix of soft grays, whites, and hints of black, like miniature versions of their dam, but shivering violently, their tiny noses tinged blue, from the unrelenting cold that had seeped into their fragile sanctuary. Shadow hovered at the edge, her body a coiled spring of conflict, torn between snapping at my every movement and the urgent need to tend to her litter, her breaths coming in visible puffs that matched the rapid rise and fall of her flanks. I could see the toll of it all etched into her features now, the exhaustion weighing down her frame, the way her proud tail drooped lower than a husky's should, her ragged breathing hinting at nights spent without real rest. Without a second thought, driven by an instinct I didn't know I still possessed, I reached in and scooped up the nearest pup gently, its body limp and cold in my palm, wrapping it swiftly in one of the towels I'd warmed against my chest during the walk. She erupted in a sharp bark then, a husky's piercing alarm call that echoed sharply through the skeletal trees, carrying for miles in the clear air, but I didn't flinch, just held her gaze steady and spoke again. "They're too far gone in this freeze, Shadow. Let me help get them safe. You've done all you can alone." That crack in her armor widened just enough. She didn't charge, but paced closer, sniffing at the bundled pup with frantic urgency. Heart pounding, I moved with quiet efficiency, transferring each one by one to the sturdy cardboard box I'd hauled along, lining the bottom with the remaining blankets I'd preheated to trap every bit of body heat I could offer. She shadowed my every action, her nose darting in to lick their damp faces with that broad, rough tongue, her maternal drive overriding the remnants of her fear as she checked on them one after another. By the time the short day began to fade into evening, painting the sky in bruised purples, we had them all back at my cabin, the little ones nestled safely by the crackling wood stove in the main room, where the warmth radiated like a promise of better days. Shadow had trailed behind the entire trek, her steps wary and deliberate, refusing to let the box out of her sight, her blue eyes flicking between me and her charges. I set up a proper bed for her in the corner near the pups. A thick layer of fresh straw topped with an old quilt Lena had pieced together from flannel scraps, still soft despite the years, and she collapsed onto it almost immediately, her body finally yielding to fatigue, though she kept vigilant watch over the scene like a sentinel carved from ice. That first night, as the pups began to stir and nurse weakly from the makeshift bottles I'd prepared, and the fire popped steadily in the hearth casting dancing shadows on the log walls, I sat across the room in my worn armchair, tears tracing hot paths down my cheeks for the first time in months. How had I been so blind to this struggle unfolding right under my nose, just a mile from my door? A lone man adrift in his own grief, missing the raw life fighting for survival in the world beyond my walls. It broke something fragile inside me wide open, seeing her unyielding devotion mirror the buried parts of my own heart, the fierce love I'd once guarded for Lena, now thawed by this unexpected family of fur and whimpers. The days that followed blurred into a whirlwind of tender care and unexpected routine, transforming my solitary cabin into a haven buzzing with fragile new life. I'd wake at the first light filtering through the iced windows, rubbing sleep from my eyes to bottle feed the pups with a special formula I'd picked up from the vet in town after a hurried phone call. He'd raised a skeptical eyebrow over the line at my somewhat jumbled tale, but promised to supply what I needed without prying too deep, drawing from his own experiences with strays during past harsh seasons. Shadow observed my every fumbling attempt with those sharp blue eyes, at first nudging my hand away with a possessive growl when I tried to assist with the feeding, her husky independence flaring like a spark. But gradually, over the hours and days, she'd allow me closer, even leaning into a tentative pat along her muzzle or behind her soft ears, her fur proving warmer and silkier than I'd imagined under the grime of the wild, thick and designed to trap heat like a natural parka. Those blue eyes of hers began to soften too, reflecting the steady glow of the firelight like twin harvest moons, holding less suspicion and more of a quiet assessment. I talked to her constantly through it all, the words pouring out like a dam breaking. Stories I'd bottled up for years, never shared with the sparse friends I had left. I'd tell her about Lena's infectious laugh that could light up the darkest room, how she danced barefoot in the kitchen to scratchy old records on rainy afternoons, spinning me into clumsy waltzes until we both collapsed in giggles. Or about the profound emptiness that had settled over me like a fog after she was gone, turning simple joys into echoes. "You're a lot like her, you know that?" I murmured one quiet evening as I scratched gently behind her ears, feeling the subtle vibration of her contentment. "Strong, right down to your core, even when the world tries to wear you down." But it wasn't all smooth sailing through those early weeks. Challenges arose that tested us both, pulling at the threads of our budding connection. The pups were alarmingly weak from their time exposed to the elements, their tiny systems battered by the cold and likely scant nourishment from their mother alone. And tragically, two of them didn't make it through that first grueling week, their small bodies simply too frail, succumbing quietly in the night despite our best efforts with heat and feeds. Shadow sensed it before I did, her low whine pulling me from sleep one dawn, and she howled that night in raw anguish, a haunting, soul-piercing husky cry that reverberated off the cabin walls and into the starry sky outside, carrying the weight of a mother's irreplaceable loss. I wrapped my arms around her trembling form as she paced and keened, holding her close for the first time without resistance, feeling the rapid beat of her heart against my chest. In that shared moment of grief, something irrevocable sealed between us. She didn't pull away or snap, but instead rested her heavy head on my knee, those blue eyes lifting to meet mine with a depth of raw gratitude that no human words could ever capture or convey. The three surviving pups, a pair of spirited girls and one sturdy boy, all fluffy bundles of emerging husky mischief with their mothers' curled tails and masked faces, began to thrive under our combined care, their weak cries strengthening into playful yips that filled the air. I named them after the stars that guided northern travelers, a nod to the Husky's storied history and sledding lore. Polaris for the steady North Star girl, Vega for the bright and bold second female, and Sirius for the wise-eyed boy, the dog star himself shining in their lineage. Shadow watched over their every tumble and nurse with a protective vigilance, her tail finally wagging in that loose, joyful curl unique to her breed. And for the first time in what felt like an eternity, my once silent home echoed with the sounds of life unfolding. As the relentless grip of winter began to loosen its hold and spring thawed the world outside in tentative drips and greening shoots, Shadow made her choice in a way that felt as natural as the changing seasons. The cabin door stayed propped open during those milder days, inviting the fresh air and the distant calls of returning birds. She could have easily slipped away at any moment, bolting back into the untamed woods toward Blackwood or beyond, reclaiming her wild freedom. But she stayed, choosing instead to trot steadfastly beside me on our lengthening walks through the melting trails, herding the increasingly adventurous pups with gentle but firm nips of her muzzle when they strayed too far. Those northern Maine woods, once a landscape of profound loneliness that amplified my isolation, transformed into our shared playground under the warming sun, alive with the rustle of budding leaves and the distant rush of swollen streams. She'd even take the lead on improvised sled runs I rigged up with the last of the snow in shaded hollows, her endless endurance and powerful pull showcasing the classic husky prowess that had carried explorers across frozen frontiers for generations. And as for me, the changes ran deeper than I could have anticipated. The man who'd hidden from the world behind his grief started to emerge again, opening up in small but meaningful ways. Chatting longer with the regulars at the general store about the weather or the best bait for trout, even dipping a toe into dating through a kindly neighbor's setup, though nothing quite stuck with the same unshakable loyalty she offered without question. One crisp afternoon, several months later, when the air still carried a hint of winter's edge but the ground was firm underfoot, we hiked back to Blackwood Cabin as a pack, the pups now sturdy juveniles bounding ahead with boundless energy. The snow had long since melted away completely, revealing the ragged, exposed den beneath the cabin's foundation in all its makeshift vulnerability, bare earth and scattered remnants of her efforts. Shadow approached it slowly, sniffing the familiar scents with a thoughtful tilt of her head, then turned to look up at me, her tail thumping rhythmically against the damp ground in a gesture of quiet closure. No more need to guard desperate secrets, just a profound sense of peace settling over the place like morning mist. As we turned and walked home together, Polaris tumbling playfully at my feet while Vega and Sirius scouted the path ahead, I realized with a clarity that warmed me more than any fire that she'd saved me every bit as much as I'd helped save her and her little ones. In the steady, piercing blue of her eyes, I saw not just survival, but forgiveness for the years I'd spent walled off in my own pain, and a gentle hope for whatever paths lay ahead in this second act of life. If you found this story helpful, please give it a 1 in the comments. If not, give it a 0. Your response will let me know if my story helped anyone. But let me back up a bit, because that profound bond we forged didn't blossom overnight like some fairy tale. It took time, patience, and more than a few setbacks that revealed the depths of her wild spirit. There were nights early on, after the pups had settled into a fragile routine, when doubt would creep into my mind like fog off the lake, making me question if I was truly doing right by her, or if I was just imposing my loneliness on a creature meant for the open wilds. Huskies are fiercely independent by nature, bred over centuries for the demanding pulls of sled teams racing across vast, unforgiving tundras in places like Alaska or Siberia, not for the confines of a cozy cabin with its routines and rules shaped by human hands. Shadow tested those boundaries in ways that kept me on my toes, that's for sure, slipping out through the slightly ajar door under the cover of night, vanishing into the moonlit woods only to return at first light, her coat caked in mud and pine needles, proudly dropping a fresh-killed rabbit at my feet like a tribute from the hunt. I'd scold her gently in the moment, wiping the mess from the floorboards, but she'd just cock her head with that inquisitive husky tilt, those piercing blue eyes meeting mine as if to say, "This is who I am, woven into my blood, accept it or not." And in time, I learned to do just that, to trust her innate instincts as she was gradually learning to trust mine, finding a balance that honored her heritage while building our shared world. The pups grew at a remarkable pace, their husky traits bursting forth in waves of playful energy that turned every day into an adventure of discovery. Vega, the boldest of the trio, inherited her mother's shimmering silver coat and developed a howl so resonant it could wake the neighbor's chickens a half-mile off, a sound that echoed the epic calls of sled dogs on long trails. She'd chase fleeting shadows across the worn wooden floors with relentless enthusiasm, her little tail curling into a perpetual question mark of curiosity, while Sirius, ever the more reserved one, mirrored my own temperament, observant and thoughtful, with eyes that seemed to hold the quiet wisdom of ancient northern skies, often curling up nearby to watch the world unfold. Polaris, the smallest but feistiest, was a whirlwind of motion, nipping at my bootlaces with tiny milk teeth until Shadow would intervene with a soft, corrective woof and a nudge of her nose, teaching boundaries with the patience of her breed. Caring for them all pulled me out of the stagnant pool of my self-absorption in ways I hadn't foreseen. I'd spend late nights by lamplight researching Husky specifics on my old laptop. Everything from their high need for physical space and mental stimulation to their unbreakable pack loyalty and how they'd historically thrived on endurance runs through blizzards, drawing from real accounts I'd read of mushers in the Iditarod who spoke of their dogs as true partners in survival. It became almost therapeutic, piecing together the blueprint of their world while simultaneously mending the frayed edges of my own, turning abstract knowledge into the tangible joy of watching them flourish. One particularly tough challenge arose without warning: Shadow's deep-seated wariness of anyone outside our small circle, a trait amplified by her Husky lineage's history of working in remote, human-light teams. When the vet finally made a house call to give the pups their first round of shots and a thorough checkup, she transformed in an instant, baring her teeth in a deep, vibrating growl that rumbled through her chest like an approaching storm, her body stiffening into a defensive posture that dared him to come closer. I had to kneel beside her, one hand lightly on her collar, not pulling, always gentle and reassuring, whispering calm words into her ear about trust and safety until she relented just enough for the exam, her blue eyes never leaving the stranger's face. "She's been through a real ordeal out there, Doc," I explained as he worked, noting the lean muscle under her fur. He nodded knowingly, drawing from his years treating working dogs on nearby farms, and confirmed she was underweight but from solid stock, with no lasting injuries. "Good thing you intervened when you did. Another week in that cold, and it might have been different for all of them." As he packed up and headed out into the thawing dusk, Shadow leaned her full weight against my leg in a rare display of reliance, her warmth seeping through my jeans like a silent thank you that spoke volumes. It reminded me so vividly of Lena's final weeks in the hospital, how she'd push away nurses and even my offers of help with a stubborn fire in her eyes until her strength ebbed, revealing the vulnerability we all share beneath the armor. That universal thread of guarded trust. It binds us tighter than we realize, whether we're human, stumbling through loss, or a husky emerging from the wild's harsh lessons. Spring arrived with a gentleness that felt like mercy, the world outside unfurling in a symphony of green shoots pushing through the mud, birdsong filling the air, and longer days that chased away the last shadows of winter. With those changes came deeper reflections on my part, woven into the fabric of our daily rhythms as I walked the winding trails with Shadow leading the way, her nose pressed to the earthy ground, ears swiveling to catch every rustle in the underbrush. I'd ponder forgiveness in those moments, the way I'd long ago forgiven the unfair hand the world dealt Lena and me, but struggled to forgive myself for simply surviving the aftermath, for the guilt that had kept me frozen in place. Shadow became my unwitting teacher in that regard. Her initial refusal to let anyone near the cabin not born of malice, but of a profound instinctual protection forged in pain and necessity. Watching her with the pups as they grew, licking their faces meticulously clean after meals, guiding them with precise nudges through the yard's obstacles, or curling around them at night in a living barrier against the chill. I witnessed a form of love so pure and unfiltered it humbled me, free of grudges or conditions, just an unwavering presence in the now. One serene evening, as the sun dipped low in a blaze of orange and gold that turned the lake to fire, I sat on the weathered porch steps with her head resting heavily in my lap, her breath warm against my hand. "You broke my heart wide open all over again, girl, but in the best way," I said softly, stroking the soft fur along her ears, feeling the subtle relaxation in her frame. She sighed in response, a deep, contented sound, her blue eyes drifting half-closed in the fading light, mirroring the peace settling over me. The town around us began to notice the subtle shift in my demeanor as well, the way my steps had lightened and my smiles came easier during chance encounters. Old Mr. Hargrove, the grizzled owner of the general store who'd known me since I was a boy fixing bikes in his driveway, started ribbing me good-naturedly as I loaded up bags of premium puppy chow and rawhide chews. "That husky pack of yours has got you grinning like a fool again, Elias. Haven't seen that spark since Lena was around." He wasn't exaggerating. Shadow and the pups had filled the echoing silence she'd left behind with a chorus of barks, playful tugs on ropes, and the soft thumps of paws on the floorboards, creating a symphony of second chances that resonated through every corner. Our evenings evolved into cherished rituals. The structured chaos of feeding time where bowls clattered and tails wagged furiously, followed by romps in the fenced yard where Shadow would demonstrate her breed's innate prowess, leaping effortlessly through remaining snowdrifts with balletic grace, teaching the pups to track elusive scents on the breeze, or pull lightweight carts I'd fashioned from scrap wood, channeling the real-life endurance feats I'd read about in stories of Yukon mushers. I'd join in the fray, laughing until my sides ached at their antics, the sound feeling both foreign and profoundly right, like reclaiming a piece of myself I'd thought lost forever. Yet it was the quieter, more introspective moments that truly wove the healing threads through my days, the ones that lingered long after the sun set. Like the night a fierce spring storm rolled in from the north, thunder cracking overhead like the world itself, fracturing, lightning forking across the sky in jagged veins. The pups, still young enough to startle, whimpered and huddled in a furry pile by the stove, their tiny bodies quaking. But Shadow stood resolute by the door at first, her growl a defiant shield against the roaring chaos outside, hackles raised as rain lashed the tin roof in sheets. I coaxed her back gently with a whistle and a treat, drawing us all into a fortress of blankets piled high on the rug, where she finally curled her protective form around me as much as the pups, her steady heartbeat thumping reassuringly against my chest amid the howling gale. In the midst of that tempest, with the cabin creaking under the assault, I felt a surge of gratitude so deep and enveloping, it warmed me more than the dying embers. Gratitude for her stubborn refusal to abandon that forsaken cabin, for the heartbreaking why behind it that had cracked open my guarded world and allowed light to flood in once more. Summer unfolded with a lazy abundance, the hillsides bursting into vibrant greens and wildflowers nodding in the breeze, the lake sparkling under endless blue skies that invited endless exploration. The pups were fully weaned by then, romping with the full vigor of young huskies, their coats gleaming like polished silver in the sunlight as they dashed through meadows and along shorelines. Shadow observed their escapades with a mother's pride, her role evolving seamlessly from fierce guardian of the den to wise guide on their adventures, corralling them back with a sharp bark or a playful chase when their curiosity led them too far afield. I toyed with the idea of rehoming them at one point, knowing good homes could be found for such striking, healthy pups. Folks in town had already started asking, drawn by tales of the miracle litter, but Shadow made her stance crystal clear with a deliberate nudge against my leg and a long, meaningful look from those blue eyes. This was our pack, and family stayed woven together through thick and thin. So we kept them all, my modest cabin expanding in spirit if not in size into a true den buzzing with energy, where the walls echoed with the symphony of their howls at dusk, a sound that blended husky heritage with the wild call of the woods. Neighbors and old acquaintances began stopping by more frequently, pulled in by the joyful barks that carried on the wind or simple curiosity about the dog man who'd come alive again. And slowly but surely, I let those walls down further, sharing cups of strong coffee on the porch while the pups charmed visitors with their curly tails, bright eyes, and inexhaustible playfulness. Vega stealing socks, Sirius offering a paw for scratches, Polaris tumbling into laps uninvited. Those interactions rekindled connections I'd let fade, turning isolation into a web of quiet support, much like how sled teams rely on each member to pull through the storm. Looking back now with the clarity of time, that stray husky wasn't merely a dog who wandered into my path. She was a living mirror, reflecting the guarded corners of my own heart back at me with unflinching honesty. Her journey from snarling sentinel at the cabin's edge to devoted companion padding through my days paralleled my own arc, from a life shrouded in isolating grief to one rich with genuine connection and purpose. Blackwood Cabin, once a stark symbol of abandonment and forgotten struggles, stood as the pivotal turning point where our stories intertwined. These days, as the bold colors of fall begin to paint the trees in fiery hues, Shadow moves beside me on our familiar walks with the easy grace of belonging, the pups trailing like a constellation in her wake, Vega scouting ahead, Sirius at my heel, Polaris weaving joyful patterns in the leaves. Her blue eyes still pierce straight through to the soul, but now they carry a warmth born of trust, earned through countless quiet acts of kindness, patience, and shared survival. And if life's thrown me any lasting lessons amid the twists, it's that the strays we reach out to in our darkest hours often end up guiding us home in ways we never imagined. Through loyalty that doesn't waver, compassion that mends the unseen wounds, and a hope that blooms enduring as the northern lights. Shadow chose me, just as I chose her and her family, and in that mutual choice, we discovered a home not bound by walls or wilds, but forged in the unbreakable bond between us.